The camera sweeps across an opulent cathedral, crystal chandeliers shimmer overhead. A live orchestra swells in the air, and guests dressed in couture murmur in anticipation. Then the massive oak doors creak open with a crash that silences everything. A woman stands silhouetted in sunlight, blonde hair tangled by the wind, lips tight, a toddler clutched in one arm. The billionaire groom goes pale. His bride freezes halfway down the aisle. The woman doesn't scream, she doesn't cry. She just walks straight toward the altar, and with one devastating sentence, she rewrites everything. Just a billionaire, he was a brand at 33. His name was carved into the steel and glass of every skyline from San Francisco to Singapore. The man who coded his first algorithm in a borrowed dorm room now sat at the helm of Wextech, a $1 trillion empire that promised the future and demand. He was brilliant, composed, and maddeningly precise, but no one ever asked what he had to lose to become that man. Rewind 6 years, before the suits, before the headlines, before the iron-walled boardrooms and private jets, there was just Elliot, a broke, restless genius with bloodshot eyes and a laptop that whirred louder than a jet engine. He shared a studio apartment the size of a storage unit in Queens. His startup barely functioned. His fridge was empty except for mustard and cheap beer. And that's when he met her, Lily Dane. She had a voice like velvet soaked in whiskey, and a laugh that could disarm cynics. Her blonde hair always looked like it had just been tousled by wind or sleep. She studied art history and painted abstracts in her bathtub at night. To Elliot, she wasn't a distraction. She was breath, she was break, she was the only softness. In his world of sharp code and sharper ambition, they lived for midnight diner runs and arguments about Nietzsche, for cheap wine and rooftop sunsets. She believed in him before anyone else did. Even when VCs laughed in his face, even when his apps crashed in demos, even when he almost gave up, she stayed. But love, real love, wasn't scalable. As the funding came in, so did the expectations. Investors wanted clean stories, marketable CEOs, no risks, no messes. Lily didn't fit the polished narrative. She'd never wear Valentino to a gala or smile for the sake of shareholders. Elliot tried to balance both worlds. He tried to keep her, but every time he missed a dinner or forgot a weekend trip, something cracked, until finally, on a cold February morning, Lily stood barefoot in their kitchen, holding something in her hand. A test, 2 lines. He didn't even see it. He was on a call. He didn't look up. He just mouthed, "Later," and stepped into his office. By the time he came out, she was gone. No letter, no explanation, just an open door and a world of silence. For years, Elliot told himself she abandoned him, that she couldn't handle the pressure, that she wasn't ready to be part of greatness. But in truth, he never checked what she left behind. He didn't open the drawer where she kept her sketchbooks, didn't scroll through the voicemail, didn't notice the tiny ultrasound photo that had slipped behind the dresser. He buried her like bad code, removed her from the script of his life until the day she walked back in. Elliot Wexler never mentioned her again. Not to his board, not to his therapist, not even to himself. Instead, he redrafted his life with the precision of a programmer cleaning a corrupted file. The man who once lived on expired ramen now flew between penthouses. He built an image of success so airtight it couldn't breathe. Every suit tailored, every headline engineered. He smiled on magazine covers and delivered keynote speeches to standing ovations. His past was officially versioned out. But grief doesn't vanish. It compiles in shadows. Sometimes it hit him when he didn't expect it. In the quiet hum of a car service before dawn. In the brush of a woman's perfume on an elevator. In a dream where he couldn't remember a face, but remembered exactly how her skin smelled when it rained. And then came Caroline. She arrived like the solution to a branding problem he didn't know he had. He met her at a private venture summit in Lake Tahoe of Henry Bishop III, legacy investor and one of the gatekeepers of old money tech funding. Caroline was crisp, composed, unshakable. She didn't flirt. Her handshakes were stronger than most men's, and her smile never showed teeth unless she was absolutely certain she had the upper hand. Elliot didn't fall in love with Caroline. He aligned with her. She knew the rules of power, and she played them well. Her family liked him. The merger between their social capital was effortless. Gossip blogs called them America's Silicon Couple. Their engagement photos broke LinkedIn for a day. And yet, Elliot often found himself watching her through glass like she was someone else's museum exhibit. He told himself it didn't matter. That love was overrated. That partnership stability, optics, legacy, those were real. They planned the wedding with military precision, held at St. Eleonora's Cathedral in Connecticut. Guest list handpicked from Fortune's elite, flower arrangements imported from Florence, for media outlets were given exclusive coverage rights. Caroline's gown had its own PR rollout. But Elliot noticed something strange as the day approached. His insomnia returned. He stayed up coding nothing at all, just watching old digital clocks count past 3 a.m. Once, while scrolling through music, playlists for the wedding, he paused too long on Debussy's Clair de Lune. That was Lily's favorite. They used to play it while they slow danced in socks, across a kitchen lit by fridge light. He shut the laptop and took a cold shower. He didn't speak to Caroline that night or the next. Then came the morning of the ceremony that the mirror reflected everything, right? The tuxedo, the posture, the practiced grin. But behind the eyes, something was missing. He stood in the church's marble foyer as violinists tuned up. His best man patted his shoulder, joking about last chances to run. Elliot didn't laugh. He glanced at the heavy doors that led into the chapel. They looked heavier than they should have. He felt it again, that gnawing pull from the past, a voice whispering from the corner of his chest, something's wrong. He dismissed it, walked into the light, and everything went exactly as planned until it didn't. The cathedral shimmered like something out of a dream. Golden light poured through stained glass windows. Guests whispered behind linen programs printed in gold foil. A string quartet played Vivaldi's Winter with the kind of restraint that made it sound like spring. Even the air smelled expensive white orchids, cedar polish, and quiet triumph. Caroline appeared at the end of the aisle in a couture gown that cost more than most people's houses. She glided, not walked, chin high, smile pristine. The photographers clicked in orchestrated bursts. Elliot stood at the altar, a human monument. One hand tucked into his tailored jacket, expression composed but beneath the silken confidence. His fingers twitched. The moment had arrived, the point of no return. Then came the sound that didn't belong. Slam! The twin oak doors at the back of the church flew open, the sound splitting the ceremony in two. Heads turned. The music stopped, mid-note silence, rolled through the pews like a wave, and there she stood, blonde hair caught in the wind, boots muddy from a dirt road, a canvas coat thrown over a wrinkled blue dress, her body stiff, her lips drawn tight. A small boy, no older than 2, clung to her hip. He wore a hand-knit sweater and wide eyes that seemed too old for someone so young. Lily, older now, paler, but unmistakably her. She didn't shout, she didn't cry, she just walked straight down the aisle. Every step echoed. Elliot felt his heartbeat climb into his throat. His mind blurred, but his eyes were sharp, locked on hers, as if he were in a nightmare that wasn't terrifying, just true. Gasps spread like wildfire. Someone whispered, "Who is she?" Caroline's face was frozen, one hand still clutching her father's arm, the other holding the bouquet like a weapon. Lily reached the front. She didn't ask for permission, didn't wait for a cue. She simply stood at the edge of the altar and looked. Elliot in the eyes, the boy shifted in her arms. He had hair like hers, wheat blonde and messy, but his eyes were unmistakably Wexler. That icy blue-gray, stormlit and fierce. Blinked once, twice. Then Lily knelt. She set the child down gently, straightened his collar, smoothed his hair, and finally, without breaking eye contact, she whispered, not loud but sharp, "Final, he's yours." No one moved. The words hung in the air like a dropped chandelier. Seconds before impact, Caroline dropped her bouquet. Gasps turned to chaos. A photographer snapped too loudly. A child cried in the back pew. Caroline's mother fainted. One of the groomsmen whispered a curse, but Elliot didn't move. He couldn't. He stared at the boy, at Lily, at the years he'd edited out of his own life, at the living proof of everything he never faced. The child stared back with wide, curious eyes. Not scared, not confused, just waiting. Lily turned. She didn't beg, she didn't explain. She just turned and began walking away. And that's when it happened. Elliot's voice cracked the silence, not loud, not angry, just real. The first real thing he'd said in years. "Lily," she stopped. The boy turned to, toddling beside her. Elliot stepped down from the altar, loosened his tie, ignored the gasps behind him, and then he dropped to his knees. He looked at the boy not as a scandal, not as a disaster, but as a beginning. Everything else fell away. The room didn't explode, it shattered. 100 tiny moments broke all at once. Caroline's father cursed under his breath, yanking his daughter away from the altar. Her heels scraped across the aisle like blades. The guests began to murmur, first in confusion, then in judgment. Phones were raised. Whispers turned to a storm. But Elliot didn't hear any of it. He was crouched beside a child who didn't speak. Didn't cry, just stared at him like he'd been waiting his whole life for this man to notice he existed. Elliot reached out slowly. The boy didn't flinch. He placed his small hand into Elliot's open palm. And that was the moment. Not when Lily walked in. Not when she said the words. Not even when Caroline fled. That touch. That undeniable, invisible tether of blood and knowing and wonder. Lily stood just a few feet away, watching it happen with the eyes of someone who had hoped but not expected. She didn't look triumphant. She looked tired, unshaken, but trembling inside. She had gambled everything to be here. She hadn't even been sure he'd recognize her, let alone the child. But the boy was his. Not just in biology, in presence, in silence, in how they looked at the world with curiosity and calculation. With a kind of quiet daring that didn't need attention, the moment stretched until it collapsed under the weight of onlookers' state security. Approached the altar, a wedding planner whispered something into a mic. Cameras clicked, flashes stung. Caroline's voice rang sharp in the distance, something about betrayal, reputation, legal action. Elliot stood up, the boy still holding his finger. He didn't look at Caroline, didn't look at her father. He turned only to Lily. His expression, unreadable. She met his eyes with steady defiance, braced for accusation, for judgment, for rejection. Instead, he spoke her name again. No title, no fury, just one syllable that felt like memory coming home. "Lily," he stepped toward her. "Let's go," he said quietly, not a command, a request. She blinked, once, twice, then nodded. They walked out together. No orchestral music, no applause, just silence. A billionaire in a black suit now covered in toddler fingerprints, and a blonde woman who once loved him before the world did. As they exited through the back doors, chaos continued behind them. Paparazzi scrambled to reposition. Reporters made calls. The narrative was already being rewritten in real time. But for Elliot, nothing else existed. He looked at the boy in the back seat of the town car. At the way he held Lily's necklace in one hand and stared out the window like the world was new again. "His name is Jonah," Lily said quietly. Elliot nodded, the name folding into his chest like a lost part of a song. She didn't ask him for anything, no apology, no plan. But Elliot knew somehow, suddenly, completely, that there would be no going back. His life had split down the center. Everything that came next would be built not on stone and steel, but on something much more fragile, something worth it. The world burned for 3 days. The media firestorm was instant, vicious, and all-consuming. Wedding wrecked by mystery blonde. Wexler's secret child corporate fallout imminent. The billion-dollar love scandal. Stock prices dipped 3% the next morning, then rebounded by noon. Board members panicked. PR firms sent crisis teams. Lawyers drafted statements. Elliot didn't read a word. He was gone, vanished into a pocket of the world without reception. Where waves hit rocks and news cycles didn't matter. He flew them Lily and Joan up the coast under a false name. To a small Grackengold house on a Maine cliff that had belonged to his grandfather. He hadn't been there in years. He wasn't even sure the water heater worked. It didn't matter. He canceled everything. Shut off his phone. Told his assistant to do damage control. Then powered down for the first time in a decade. The house was cold when they arrived. Wind howled through the cracks. The kettle rusted. Jonah was cranky, and Lily was silent. But by the second day, something shifted. Elliot fixed the heater, replaced the batteries in the old radio, took Jonah down to the rocky shore to throw stones. Watched him squeal when a seagull stole his cracker, Lily stayed mostly inside at first, sketching in silence. But she watched him closely, not suspiciously, just as someone trying to measure if a man can really change after burying himself for so long. One night, Jonah crawled into Elliot's lap while he was reading the boy a bedtime story and fell asleep there. Elliot didn't move for hours later. As he laid the boy down and stepped into the hallway, Lily stood in the doorway, arms folded. "He's like you," she said quietly. Elliot didn't know what to say to that, so he said, the only thing that mattered, "I'm sorry, not for the scene, not for the press, for everything, for not listening, for leaving her alone in that kitchen, for never asking what she needed, for becoming a man who only looked forward and never back." Lily said nothing, but her eyes softened. And that night, she sat beside him on the porch as waves crashed below. They shared a blanket, didn't speak, just existed. Each day after that, something small healed. Jonah started calling him Io in a slurred, toddler accent. Lily began humming again when she washed dishes. Elliot stopped flinching every time the house was quiet, no longer fearing the silence would remind him of what he once lost. They talked about the past, the hurt, the reasons she left, the months she debated calling, the terror of raising a child alone, the guilt, the grace. They didn't romanticize it. They didn't pretend, but in that rawness, something real bloomed one morning. Elliot watched Jonah chase a gull across the beach, his blonde hair flying behind him, Lily laughing nearby with her jeans rolled up and sand on her knees, and he realized this was the future he was building for all along. He just hadn't known it. "It rained the morning," he asked, "not a heavy storm, just a fine coastal mist, like the sky was hesitant to let go." The fog clung to the shoreline. The old house creaked as if it knew something was about to change. Elliot stood in the kitchen barefoot, hair messy, holding a small wooden box he'd carved himself in the garage. Inside it sat a ring-simple, uncut moonstone in a band of silver. Not expensive, not branded, just right. Lily walked in holding Jonah, who was clutching a toy car with one missing wheel. She wore a faded sweater and had smudges of graphite on her fingers from drawing. Elliot turned. His voice caught in his throat. "I don't have a speech," he said. "Just this." He opened the box. Lily looked at it, then at him, then at Jonah. She didn't cry right away. She laughed, first a breathless trembling sound like surprise breaking open. Then came the tears. Not dramatic, just real. She didn't say yes. She nodded. That was enough. The wedding happened 2 weeks later, barefoot on the cliffs above the water. No suits, no guests in designer shoes. Just an old friend of Lily's who was ordained online, a dog from the neighbor's farm that wouldn't stop barking, and Jonah refusing to wear anything but his dinosaur T-shirt. Lily wore a cream dress that caught the breeze like sails on a ship. Elliot wore rolled-up sleeves and a wild kind of peace on his face that no billion-dollar valuation had ever given him. There was no aisle, no choir, no press. They wrote their own vows, not promises of perfection, but of presence. Elliot vowed never to miss the little things, the breakfasts, the bad dreams, the crayon drawings left on the fridge. He vowed to show up, even when he didn't have answers. Lily vowed to let love in again, to trust, not blindly, but bravely. Jonah shouted yay at the kiss. Afterward they danced in the tall grass. No music, just the wind and the waves. Jonah spun in circles until he fell over laughing. That night, by firelight, they roasted marshmallows in the old stone pit out back. Lily leaned her head on Elliot's shoulder. He looked at her not as a ghost from a lost chapter, but as the future he almost didn't deserve. She looked at him not as the billionaire the world feared or followed, but as the boy who once held her hand in the dark and asked if she believed in impossible things. They didn't talk about the old wedding again. They didn't need to. Some stories end in cathedrals with gold ceilings and chandeliers. Theirs ended on a cliff with grass stains, soft laughter, and a second chance. But maybe it didn't end at all. Maybe this was the beginning. And when people ask where Elliot Wexler, the tech visionary, the lost prodigy, went after walking away from the altar, they're told he lives somewhere quiet, a place where Wi-Fi is bad but bedtime stories are strong, where his son rides on his shoulders, and where a blonde woman with gray eyes still paints at sunrise, no longer alone.